Welcome to Leaders Get Real, inspirational interviews with today's authentic leaders. I'm your host, Christy Tonge, bringing you inspirational interviews with leaders who are purposeful, passionate, and who lead with inspiration and impact. The leader I'll be featuring next is all that and more. So much so that I'll be doing a whole series instead of just one episode. I just couldn't resist, and I am so jazzed about this. Now, let me be honest to say, I did not see this coming, but I innocently watched a few episodes of Ted Lasso with my husband, Barry, and I got hooked. Besides the belly laughs and the heartwarming moments, there are leadership lessons tucked inside every episode. Now, if you haven't seen the show, that is totally okay. You can get the backstory on my Leaders Get Real website, and I've got clips for you, actually, to watch inside every episode. The premise of the show is that the owner of a British Premier League soccer team hires an American coach from Kansas who has never coached soccer in his life. That's Ted Lasso. They hire him to coach their losing team as a joke, and everybody expects he's doomed to fail because he knows nothing about soccer. But with good intentions and a really keen understanding of people, he surprises everyone with what the power of authentic leadership can do. So this series featuring Ted Lasso is going to be fun. For each episode, I've invited a special guest who is a genuine, if not raving fan of Ted Lasso, and who's also someone with an insightful leadership perspective. And I've asked them to choose their favorite scene for us to talk about. Now that's a power-packed combination. So buckle up and let's dive in to leadership lessons with Ted Lasso. I have been looking forward to having my guest today, Jesse Jacob, on the show. And Jesse, I know you have been a raving fan of Ted Lasso for a long time, from the start, in fact. And so welcome, Jesse.
Oh, thank you. This is going to be fun. I love when my favorite things come together. You're like culture, leadership, and soccer. I played soccer growing up and in college. So I love when my things come together and we can find themes and parallels. It's going to be good.
Awesome. Yes, lots of good themes here. So it's really fitting to have Jessie. She is a leader in the arena of workplace culture, and she's currently the head of community engagement for Culture First, which is a growing movement supported by the company Culture Amp. And so, Jessie, who is Culture First?
Yeah, well, Culture Amp is an employee engagement platform. We are on a mission to creating a better world of work. And so we have a community of people around the world who also believe a better world of work. We know that we're not going to deliver on this mission with just our software and our technology alone. So we have a community of people who are dedicated to having discussions about how do we create a better world of work. So we have a few different areas of where community lives at Culture Amp, and I have the honor of running our global chapters program. So we have 100 global chapters with about 150 chapter leads who host meaningful discussions about the future of work. How do we make work not suck? So when you think about mental health at work, DE&I, how to thoughtfully respond to COVID, those kinds of things. Yeah, my job is to help facilitate those discussions.
You have a very cool job. We're going to want to unpack that later. I love it. A movement of people who believe a better world of work is possible and are willing to take action to make it real.
Yes.
That is cool. So we're going to unpack that some more. But first, let's talk about Ted Lasso, which is why we came together. So I love when I have a guest for this series to get to say, hey, what's a favorite episode that comes to your mind when you think about all the leadership lessons that are in the show? So what for you is one of those scenes where there's a great leadership lesson?
Okay, so one of my favorite scenes is where Jamie Tart, who's like this like super highly arrogant player, obviously for AFC Richmond, but he's like really good. He's like the superstar. He's clearly very selfish and it's all about him, very egotistical, and he's also a ball hog. And so what ends up happening is that the coach, Ted Lasso, sees his bad behavior and then What does he decide to do? He decides to bench his star player, risking putting the team at a loss. And then
benching Jamie Tart,
yeah,
the best player.
Yeah. I love that scene though. It's so good. And just like a perfect example of putting the culture first so that you can continue to work effectively together as a team. So I want to dig into that scene. That's the one.
Okay. Yes. So that scene, oh my gosh. So I think it was like tied 2-2, and Jamie had scored the 2 goals for the team because he's the star. And
so what ends up happening is Jamie Tart is a giant ball hog, and he's obviously selfish and arrogant and makes everything about him. One of his teammates ends up like, falling to the ground. He doesn't end up helping him up, and like it's just like a total like what a butthead move, basically.
At that point, it panned to Ted.
Mm-hmm.
And you could see that he was not happy with what was going on. And he made a big decision in that moment when they were relying on him to win the game, and he benched him.
Hey, Rebecca.
Hello, Ted.
You're doing great, Dad.
Yeah, you got this.
Thanks, guys. I want to bench Jamie, but I didn't want to do it without checking with you first.
But, Ted, you're the manager, so whatever you decide, you have my full support.
Thanks, boss. All right. Later, alligator.
Bye, Dad.
And it appears Coach Lasso has decided to rejoin the match, already in progress.
Roberts, warm up. You going in. Let's go. Come on. Hey, highlighter.
We got ourselves a sub. 16's going in from 9.
Okay.
Appreciate you, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, it looks like Lasso is making an early substitution here. He's bringing Roberts on and he's taking off Jamie Tart.
What on earth? He's taking off his best player, and with less than a minute remaining in the half.
Robbie Roberts, the number 9, Jamie Tart.
Hey, way to play out there. Way to get us back in.
The referee looks at his watch, and that's half-time. What kind of reception awaits Lasso in his locker room?
So it was clearly, it was a tough decision. It was a big decision. And he was immediately getting criticism for it because people were worried. They're like, that's our only chance. And I'd love to unpack a little bit, Jesse, of in the workplace.
Yeah.
The same things happens. Do you see it where there's somebody who's the high performer, somebody who is, the smart one or the technical one, and maybe they actually are the one who's, self-absorbed or arrogant or not collaborative, and yet we put up with it?
Oh, I mean, it's really common, I feel like, in sales, especially because salespeople are inherently incentivized by very different things than the rest of the team. They can make it about like wanting them to have their next commission and then selling things that like maybe the team, especially at startups, like things that the team hasn't even built before, that like it's not even following like what the unified front is of like, here's what we're going to market with. And then they're just like adding customized things because they can, and all for the sake of their commission. So really making it about themselves. So that's like a very common scenario. But there's also like folks that maybe don't align, like their behaviors don't align with the culture's values of what the organization has said. This is what's important to us. But because they're a high performer, because they're responsible for so many things, people continue to like kind of turn a blind eye and just like let the behavior go, which ends up having a negative impact on the organization and how the team works together.
Totally. Oh my gosh. As you said those examples, I started thinking of all the times I've seen that. Now, you're in Kansas City, Mo, where you're based. I am in the Silicon Valley. And so I see this all the time, as a consultant, as an executive coach that's inside all these different tech companies and startups, especially, where you will have some of the, founders or the engineers who are responsible for a bunch of stuff that they're really reliant on. And boy, do people put up with bad behavior. And, it's like everybody's enablers who are like, who are actually part of the problem, and leaders don't actually do something about it.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, those examples you described, I saw something recently because I'm inside so many different organizations and working really closely with clients. I saw a scenario where very up close, there was that scenario, startup with somebody, an engineer who had all the smarts and who the company at this early stage was incredibly dependent. Like this person had architected all of the technology that they were relying on day to day. And it was just like the scene in Ted Lasso where like nobody saw it coming. Like everybody knows that Jamie, the player, was just, all about himself and he was never playing for the team. But in this workplace situation, the same thing was going on. And the CEO made a huge, courageous decision and decided to exit that person. And people did not see it coming. And it was really, really fascinating to see. I know you are an expert, you're all about culture, you're passionate about it, but that was a scene where I saw a leader making a decision for culture.
Yeah.
Because this person was not collaborative. They were squelching innovation because they felt their answer was always the right one. Their solution was always the best one. And so what happened to the culture almost overnight, when that exit happened, suddenly it was like this collective, like,
right.
like this liberating where people felt like, oh my gosh, we can share our ideas. And like you have a lot of great ideas. And I know that, you can contribute on this. And suddenly a lot of people were really energized, and it spoke volumes that the leader was willing to make a courageous decision like that, because it was a real risk.
Yeah.
Just like for the team, in Ted Lasso, it was a huge risk.
Well, for the results and the impact, like we're not willing to put up with this anymore, and we do care about the long-term infinite game rather than like the short-term like pain that this like person or like maybe these people are causing. And it's and when you let that bad behavior go on for so long, it's hard to believe the values that you put up on the wall. It's like hard to believe that like you don't actually care about that. And so when you're going to say like, okay, we're going to remove this person, it like is such a signal that you're like actually holding folks accountable for the aligned or misaligned behaviors that the organization stands for.
Yes, I love that, tying it to values, because that's at the heart of a purposeful culture is, what are the values of that organization? And so let's dig in. We said earlier, your role in this culture space. And let's talk about that, because we can explore a little bit of what does that mean to be a culture first organization. So earlier, we were talking about your role in leading the culture first movement, and that being a movement of people who believe a better world of work is possible and are willing to take action to make it real.
Yeah.
I love that. Now, I got hooked when I discovered this movement of people, and now I'm very honored I get to actually, co-lead the San Francisco Bay Area chapter. But so there's 100 chapters around the world. We'll talk about that some more, but say what it means to be culture first. If a company or a team or a group is culture first, what does that mean?
Okay, so I want to start with like, what is culture first not? Which is like many organizations think that culture is this unintentional byproduct of striving towards business and like business goals and financial goals. And so what happens is like, they're like, we have these goals and then that's going to drive our performance, which ultimately then we can like invest in the culture. And so that is like absolutely not what putting culture first is all about. What being culture first is about is like our bedrock of this, like these values of what we stand for. So at Culture Amp, we have these values of having the courage to be vulnerable, learning faster through feedback, amplifying others, trusting others to own decisions. Those are the 4 values that are internally at Culture Amp. So we always say that these values, how we do things is our culture, will drive our results and our performance so that we can deliver on our mission, which is to create a better world of work. And so really what culture first is like putting your values first. To the culture is to achieve impact. It's about giving and getting, this like mutual accountability to our result or our behaviors and our results. It's this idea of like playing the long game, the infinite game, rather than like the lowering our standards and expectations. It's about inclusivity. People are feeling seen and valued and appreciated for their unique contributions and diverse backgrounds that they're bringing to the table, rather than like conformity or consensus or like a culture for everyone. And culture first is all about being equitable and like fair and considering like additional context and things like that, rather than thinking about equality and that everyone gets the same thing. So anyway, ultimately, like zooming out, it's all about our values drives our performance so that we can deliver on our mission, is what being culture first means.
Awesome. And there are all kinds of studies, all kinds of studies. I mean, if you want to go back to the quote that's been around for a few decades now, before people became much more conscious of culture, but, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And, you can have great product, you can have great strategy and all of that, but we've all seen it where you've got all of that stuff and an organization does not succeed because they actually, have human issues that are going on and they're not actually leveraging all of the talent, all of the commitment and the kind of mission driven energy of people when they have a purposeful culture.
Yeah, I mean, even not a non-culture first organization can still be financially successful. Obviously, it's very clear. However, you're probably going to deal with a lot of employee churn, a lot of resentment.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably going to cost you a lot more actually, because those employees are going to churn and you're going to have to hire more and you're going to invest in onboarding and all of those things. So like, it's not to say that like organizations that aren't culture first aren't successful or they won't be successful, because that's not necessarily true and I don't believe that. But we think about like the more conscious way of doing business is thinking about it from this infinite mindset and to like invest in the people experience and the culture. And that like we want to create a better world of work. We want to create a place where people feel like they're doing their best work. So we want to make work not suck. It's like we're spending so much time at work, like we might as well enjoy what we're doing. And not to say that we can like guarantee happiness. And I don't think organizations should optimize for employee happiness per se, but we can create places that people feel like they're doing their best work and they're like aligned with their strengths and all, and like we're working effectively together to solve collective problems. I do think that's possible.
Yeah, and that's higher performance.
Totally.
And that's exciting when you actually can apply the higher performance to really some meaningful impact.
Yeah.
Well, let's circle back now to this scene and to these scenarios where you've got sometimes some smart individuals, some ones that you're reliant on in different things, or people who get away with not living the values, not walking the talk.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's one thing to look at this example where this sort of dramatic thing happens where, oh my gosh, they benched the best player. Or in my case, oh my gosh, they exited the high performing engineer. But what does this look like? It has me thinking about just the smaller stuff, because not everybody's in a role to go, fire somebody, for example.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking of the scene that happens before the benching. And there was a scene in the locker room. And I imagine it sort of led up to his ultimately larger decision. But there was a scene where the whole team put hands in. They were doing the team huddle. And after the huddle, Ted walks over to Jamie and he said, now, are you a germaphobe? Or I'm trying to figure out why you didn't put your hands in with the rest of the team. And he calls him on it. And it opens up this whole conversation. And that just strikes me of like, okay, it's not the big dramatic decisions necessarily, but there's just little things every day that we can do inside our team or inside our organization. And I'm curious your thoughts on that, of the little things or the everyday things that help to create the kind of culture you were talking about.
Well, so part of a culture first organization is being intentional with like how we do things and how we've defined our working agreements and what we've committed to. And so part of that is having these clearly defined values, and with that means that there are aligned behaviors to those values, and then there are misaligned behaviors to those values. And so what I feel like it is happening is like Ted Lasso seeing like, this is totally not aligned behavior with like the environment and the culture and the team dynamic that I'm trying to create. And so therefore I'm going to call this person out for a misaligned behavior, essentially. And that's how I like to think of it.
I love that. I love that you bring out that whole idea of intention, because that strikes me back to when he made this bold decision to bench Jamie. And now I'm reflecting back that the announcer, well, even the crowd, like they were saying, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing. And now that I think back, I was like, oh, yes, he did. He knew exactly what he was doing. And that wasn't just this impulse. Like, that was something that, like you said, it was very intentional, and he did it knowing that it had a lot of risks. They might very well lose the game now, lose the match.
Totally.
And yet he did it.
I haven't known you that long, but I can honestly say you are the best athlete I've ever coached.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, I work hard, yeah.
I see it. You are truly great at everything you do out there. Except for one thing.
My left foot cross.
No. Jamie, I think that you might be so sure that you're 1 in a million that sometimes you forget that out there you're just 1 of 11. And if you just figure out some way to turn that me into us, sky's the limit for you.
One of the quotes that Ted Lasso says to Jamie Tart is, you're one of the best players, but you're missing one thing. And if you turn that me into us, the sky's the limit. And so just like that, you can tell that that is the type of team or like culture that Ted Lasso's trying to cultivate, which is one where they do things together and they work together rather than this like me versus we kind of environment where like it's super highly egotistical and like Jamie's only looking out for himself. And then you start to see like his character evolve and like be super focused on later on in the like season and like future seasons of just like he really does start to kind of adopt like a team mindset rather than like a me.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Is that actually his tough decisions and some of those calls and continuing to build a culture of a team that didn't have, a bunch of top talent. And yet you see them actually getting better and better. And ultimately, Jamie does start to actually exhibit more and more the behavior that he's thinking of others on the team. And it's interesting, in that scene, he benches them at halftime. They still have it's 2-2. They still have the rest of the game. But I thought it was pretty telling that the winning in the last minute, Richmond has the ball. Roy Kent, who was the former sort of star, he has the ball. He's within range of the goal, but he passes it off. And he does that extra pass that they talk about with the team, and he passes it off to Sam, the new guy. and Sam scores the goal. And watching the celebration of the team when they did it, like, and I think they were stressed too when Jamie Tartt got benched. Like, they were like, what?
Yeah,
on him, as much as he might be a frustration.
They didn't even believe that they could win without him.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's interesting to reflect on all the impacts, not just, on the one person whose decision to bench him might potentially change behavior, but just the ripple effect it has, that people saw, them being sort of rewarded for being the ones that pass to others and being rewarded for the ones that look out for each other.
Yeah, I really do think a lot about this. Like, there's a difference between being intentional with the culture you're trying to create and unintentional, which is like, if we're being intentional, we have clearly defined values of how we agree to do things around here, which is our culture. And then from there, we have aligned and misaligned behaviors. And then when we're noticing the aligned or misaligned behaviors, we have to hold each other accountable for those things. So we either need to reinforce the aligned behaviors that we want to continue to see, or we need to call out the misaligned behaviors and have conversations around feedback. And I mean, thinking about like Culture Amp, like I had a chance to go through my first performance cycle this past year, and it was really cool to be able to reflect on like my coworkers, my peers, and also myself, of like, how did I show up? Was I having the courage to be vulnerable? Were they having the courage to be vulnerable? In the last 6 months, where did I even notice that behavior in our time together? And same thing with like, how did I amplify others? Were other people amplifying others? What were the very small specific things that they did? Did they give me a shout out on Slack? Did someone show up to my event? Did this person share some things about like maybe they weren't on track with a project and they like, it took a lot of courage to be able to share that? Like, really looking for like, once your brain gets starting to focus on the values and like what are aligned behaviors, your brain starts to see them and notice those pattern recognition over and over and over again. But anyway, now I'm on a rant about.
I love it. No, that is such a great example of just the everyday stuff. Yeah. The everyday stuff, the call outs on Slack, rather than just taking credit for yourself, or those things that really do make that value of amplifying others that your company holds come to life.
Totally.
And, this is a podcast about leadership, and yet it has nothing to do with what title or what role you hold, because even though in this case, Ted did have the authority, he was coach, but there's other things, you can see it in the episode, that players, other members of the team can do. And then, back at work, you were just giving examples that any of us can do as acts of leadership.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of my kids were in school, like junior high and so on. There was this whole campaign about anti-bullying, which is be an upstander. And that just kind of strikes me of like, that's a way you can be culture first. That's a way you can be a leader, no matter what your role is in a given, team or organization, is be an upstander. And, like you said, just having those values as filter. And when you see someone who's going against those values, again, there's all kinds of good ways to do that. Not, sometimes it's calling it out publicly because it's important symbolically to do that. Sometimes it's more of, taking somebody in private and having just an honest conversation. But I think about all the different ways, whether it's like you just saw a microaggression take place and you saw somebody who, was really, hurt in a situation, whether anybody's going to just let it pass on by and let those comments continue, or whether they're going to call it out or, again and again.
Well, and bringing it back to Culture Amp's tools, like, yes, Culture Amp is an employee experience platform. We have an engagement software, which is all around like helping employers get a pulse on like, what is the employee experience here? How do we have employers better listen to employee feedback to ultimately create a better culture? But we also have a performance management tool so that you can do that. And there have been there have been multiple times where I've had peers and coworkers like reach out after working together to say, hey, I'd love your feedback. Like, how could I have been 10% better through this like project we worked on together? Obviously, one of our values is learning faster through feedback. And that's a perfect example of like, one, that's an aligned behavior by like this employee is asking for feedback. And two, like, how do we continue to iterate on this and like actually be receptive to like maybe they weren't aligned with some of the other values that we say are important to us. And like maybe that's the time to call it out or reinforce the stuff that they are doing well.
Fantastic. Very cool. Well, I always like to share resources, and by having you on here, that's another resource because I found that Culture First was a hidden secret. Like I'd not heard of it before, and when I found this group of people that are really passionate about doing exactly what you said, is being intentional, realizing they can create a better world of work around whatever, group or community or company they're in. And so say a word. You said there's over 100 chapters around the world.
Yeah.
And so chapters are volunteer led and they're bringing energy to a group locally in different places. So there's chapter stuff, but there's also global opportunities.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the resource.
Okay, so at Culture Amp, we have the Culture First community. It's where global people leaders, HR practitioners, and just other change agents who care about creating a better world of work come together to be inspired by their peers, to ideate, to share best practices on how do we create a better world of work. So that lives in a lot of different areas at Culture Amp. One of them being what you were mentioning, Christy, the Culture First Chapters program. But we also have a People Geek Slack community. We have a digital forum with over 20,000 people in there who are sharing ideas, resources, jobs, you name it. People are in there supporting each other. We have our Culture First Global Conference that happens regionalized this year, where we have some amazing speakers like Esther Perel was just speaking. Like, it's just an incredible opportunity to learn from some big thought leaders. We also have a Culture First podcast. We have research. We have a newsletter. But those are all the areas of where community lives. I have the honor of running the Culture First Global chapters. Like you said, these are volunteer-led groups of people who share our mission of creating a better world of work. These chapter leads around the world are either HR practitioners or consultants, and they basically gather people in their either geographic-based chapters or maybe their topic-based chapters. And we talk about trending topics in the culture space, our challenges. Maybe they talk about research, and like a lot of times we have a lot of rich research at Culture Amp, so maybe they're talking about that, and really pushing the edge of conversations about the future of work. So this is open to anyone, not just like Culture Amp customers or prospects, but really anyone who aligns with our mission. And we are talking about some really bold topics that I'm super proud of our chapter leads for facilitating these discussions. So yeah, we're on a mission to co-create a better world of work.
Awesome. I am so energized every time I attend, and this is no cost. Anybody can take part, and I love hopping in. I go on the website and I find like, oh, there's a really cool topic on psychological safety in Beijing tomorrow, or oh, there's something really cool in Berlin, or I have to look up some of the African countries of like where they are exactly. As well as, hopping in with people in North Carolina or in San Diego and so on. So that has been a cool resource. And we'll make sure to put some info in the show notes of how you can find a chapter near you, or you can find the Culture Geek community or People Geek community.
You can go to cultureamp.com/community to learn more about our Culture First community. And then to go learn more about the chapters program, it's chapters.culturefirst.com. And go and find a local chapter, find your people. I had a chance to go to Culture First Global back in 2019. And I tell people often, I'm like, I feel like I had a religious experience where I was like, wow, these are my people, so overwhelmingly so that like I want to keep talking about this like these topics and these things, and I care so much about this mission. And so the chapters community is just like an amazing opportunity. It's not just like another webinar to consume I felt so fired up after the conference that I wanted to like bottle up and keep these conversations going. And so, which is why I initially started the Kansas City chapter. And so the chapters programs are just an amazing way to like meet other like-minded people and to like actually be in discussion with them about these topics. That's how we learn together rather than just like consuming content in one ear and out the other. Like we learn by being in dialogue with one another. And that's what the chapters community is all about. It's like facilitating these inspiring experiences and purposeful connections to unlock community at work.
Awesome. Well, my listeners always like to have us get practical, get real and get practical. So on the practical front, let's talk for a minute about actions we can take tomorrow. And you have been talking about values. You've been talking about alignment, misalignment. What's something that listeners could do as soon as tomorrow?
Ooh. Well, maybe you have a super simple thing, like maybe you have values that your organization stands for, but maybe you haven't clearly articulated what are the aligned and misaligned behaviors of those values. Like, what do those look like in action if we embody them? And what do those not stand for? So maybe that's a very simple thing that you can do next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fabulous. And, we don't have to feel constrained if our organization doesn't have this amazing, rollout of the values and the behaviors too. So like you said, you can help bring that to light of what it looks like. And I've seen people who just calling out kudos for a colleague. It's like, oh, you name the value instead of just saying great job or, thanks. It's like naming the value, just like you did in your company. It's amplify others, et cetera.
I love it.
Love all these ideas. And now it'll be made available for everybody to find how they can tap into more resources. And thanks to Ted Lasso, he continues to still makes mistakes, as we see, and still is very human along the way. But I love the scene you chose, Jessie. And that's such a great example of how a leader can truly shape the environment and create a really healthy, a really thriving culture that allows everybody to win.
So good. Thanks, Christy.
Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you'd like to see show notes and resources from today's show, or get alerts about new episodes, go to leadersgetreal.com. There, you'll also find many compelling interviews with top authors and authentic leaders. If you enjoyed today's interview, please share it with a friend or colleague. You can find Leaders Get Real in video on YouTube and through your favorite podcast app. And to help spread the word, please follow and like on LinkedIn, Instagram, and iTunes. And be sure to comment. You may just win a book. Thanks for listening and stay tuned for the next Ted Lasso episode coming soon. Until next time, go forth, get real, and as Ted would say, believe.